I'm joined now by Sajjan Gohel via Skype. He's the International Security Director of the Asia Pacific Foundation. First, your thoughts on the Syrian president saying that he expects fighting to continue, but Aleppo would be a huge step in ending the war. What do you think?
Well, Elaine, depending on which side or which perspective one sees it from, in many ways, Aleppo forms a microcosm of what is the civil war in Syria. It was very much one of the first cities that rebelled against the Assad regime back in 2012. It's where some of the most fierce battles have been taking place. And slowly, over the last 2 weeks, the regime of President Bashar al-Assad have been regaining territory there. The rebels now control arguably about 25% of the city. They've been confined, they've been surrounded. And if Aleppo falls, and it's just a question, I guess, of when rather than if, it will be a significant turning point for the Bashar al-Assad regime. And it just shows you what a difference 18 months makes, because in the summer of last year, the regime was being spread thin. They didn't have the resources. They didn't have the support. The Russian intervention became a game changer, aided the regime, and they've been able to regain territory, especially in Aleppo, ever since.
You said it's not a question of if, but when. When it happens, what happens next?
Well, this is a very important question because the city of Aleppo has been destroyed. Many people describe it in many ways as Syria's Stalingrad, which is a reference to World War II, the battle between the Nazis and the Soviets for the city of Stalingrad, which was destroyed ultimately between skirmishes of both sides. And there is very little infrastructure left, especially when it comes to hospitals, schools. And it's very important that there's a rebuilding effort. Now, if President Bashar al-Assad takes victory in Aleppo, he has to show, he has to be magnanimous. He has to be able to give concessions to rebels, to be able to allow agencies, relief agencies to work there, for there to be reconstruction. There's been fear of reprisals, of revenge, and that is only going to create more problems. Syria needs to heal, and in many ways, the starting point has to be in Aleppo, a city that has been destroyed and hundreds of thousands of people are displaced.
Let's talk about a ceasefire here. There have been talks of ceasefires. There have been ceasefires. They haven't lasted. The U.S. and 5 Western nations released a joint statement. No headway with a UN resolution on a ceasefire. How do these civilians get aid when a ceasefire is not going to happen?
Well, the civilians, I'm afraid, are the biggest casualties and victims because, as you mentioned, the ceasefires, they barely last, less than a few days, if that. There are too many different actors involved, whether you look at it from the rebel front, because it's not just, say, the Syria Free Army. You have other groups like the YPG, which is a Kurdish outfit, or you have the Jabhat Fatah al-Sham, which was formerly affiliated to al-Qaeda. They're all got different perspectives, different agendas. The al-Assad regime also operates with a different mindset to that of, say, the Western interests, the role of Russia. All these different actors complicates the situation. But the fact is that the Syrian regime may have the advantage, but they have to now try and work to rebuilding the country, to show reconciliation. This goal, this agenda to wipe out the enemy, the opposition, however they want to describe it, is not going to resolve the problem because the scars will remain. And we have to remember that ISIS still exists. And if there are these problems of people being displaced, of the fact that the infrastructure is not being rebuilt, ISIS will exploit that situation. And as we know, and one thing we can all agree on, is ISIS are no friends of anybody.
One last quick question, about 20 seconds left. If this does resolve on its own within Syria, do these outside countries that have not really played a part, do they have a part in rebuilding Syria?
Everybody in the region has a huge stake to help rebuild Syria, whether it is some of the Arab countries, the Gulf Arab states, the United States, Russia, China. It's very important that they get involved and they help the country to rebuild and to heal, because what happens in Syria can have a knock-on effect in neighboring countries, and it can even have a more international ramification with what I was mentioning about terrorism. So it's very important that there's a rebuilding process in Syria.
All right, Sajjan Gohel, thank you so much for joining us from London.
Pleasure.